My name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, here with another Transformation Tuesdays. And this one is very special because this is also a hard conversation. Today we'll be talking about race and racism and homelessness. Transformation Tuesdays is a way that we talk to our Dallas community about race and racism happening in our community and what we can do to address it. This conversation is really special because we'll be featuring a partnership between Dallas TRHT and MDHA. I want to say hi first to my partners in this work. And we're going to start with Dr. David Woody. Dr. Woody, good morning, Dr. Woody. Dr. David Woody has been serving at the Bridge Homeless Recovery Center for 5 years. After 3 years as Chief Services Officer, Dr. Woody accepted the honor of transitioning to the role of President and CEO. Dr. Woody, I'll let you tell a little bit more about what you do at the Bridge and your role, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jerry, and thanks all for having me this morning. It's a beautiful day and an even better day to be talking about issues of racism and homelessness. Here at the Bridge, we are an awesome destination for individuals, citizens in the city of Dallas who are looking for an exit strategy from homelessness. Pre-COVID-19, we were seeing nearly 900 citizens on our campus a day. And during the months of November 2019, December 2019, January 2020, February 2020, we are seeing nearly 250 new individuals to homelessness each month. So that speaks to the significance of poverty in Dallas. I know you've done a lot of work in terms of the significance of poverty and its connectedness to homelessness, especially in the African American community. And we see that on our campus. Over 60% of the guests on our campus, we call our clients guests, over 60% of the guests on our campus are African American. And so what we see is that lack of access to issues related to education, healthcare, behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse care, support, identifying employment, lack of access to those issues conspires to land too many of the folks that we see on our campus as being homeless. And what we offer, the unique thing that we're doing, Jerry, on our campus is that we have all those services right here, one spot, one-stop shop. Parkland Hospital has a clinic here. MetroCare Services, mental health, substance abuse issues, workforce solutions, legal aid. We serve 3 meals a day. 15% of the homeless population has a canine companion because most shelters don't have a kennel. They won't come off of the street. We have a kennel right here on our campus, a barber shop. We sleep 300 individuals, offer night shelter to those folks every evening. So care management, how is it that an exit strategy would be created? We, with each guest, create a care and housing plan, that exit strategy, which prioritizes health, mental health, employment, family-related, prioritizing those things to actually craft an exit strategy from homelessness. So we are lucky enough here at 1818 Court Street to be a beacon, I think, to folks who are homeless, and we're particularly sensitive to issues of access for the African American population and having those services right here to address the needs that otherwise in the community they may not have access to.
No, thank you, Dr. Woody. That's impressive. I didn't even know all of those services, and I've been to the bridge several times. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But I want to get into this this question about like what's happening now,
Yes.
particularly during this pandemic. You know, this is also a presidential election happening right now, and then
Yes.
reckoning with racism that's going on. How's it altered the way that your organization has operated, particularly when it comes to thinking about the issues of homelessness and how it affects issues of race and racism?
As you can imagine, the COVID experience has really dramatically impacted not just our services delivery on our campus, but also in the homeless response system here in Dallas. Because of social distancing, because of spread reduction best practices, all shelters had to reduce their capacity, right? Which meant for the bridge that we were pushing off of our campus, at least at night, nearly 90 people, right, who wouldn't have night shelter here, okay? And so it's the same in terms of access to all of the day shelter opportunities as well. Again, we have put in place hand washing expectations, the use of hand sanitizer, the wearing of a mask, and we are taking guest temperatures and employee temperatures for that matter on our campus. So we have been lucky enough, Jerry, to not have any guest test positive for COVID-19. Amazing, 7 months worth. Okay?
That is amazing.
It's miraculous, really. But it's about our engaging our guests in who are vulnerable to this, right? In how they can take care of themselves, but also the fact that we have Parkland on our campus, that we have Dallas Fire and Rescue technicians on our campus to take care of the needs of folks who might believe that they have symptoms, to get those evaluated and get assistance from Parkland in terms of getting tests has been miraculous, okay? But when you layer on top of that, Jerry, the issues of racial injustice, okay, it's been an incredibly challenging experience. And so I'll talk about it from two perspectives. Number one, our guests, okay? Many of our guests, a portion of their being homeless typically is also connected to issues of racial injustice, the experience of racism, and the trauma that's connected to those kinds of experiences. And so when we're talking about that care and housing plan, some of our care managers have to prioritize how it is that folks have had to manage those experiences, especially when trying to engage services in our community, okay? The second piece is our employees, right? I would tell you that even David Woody, Dr. David Woody, has had to deal with trauma related to racial injustice. It's not like I just walked into this job. I'm just saying, okay? And so there have been traumatic experiences along my academic and my work career that I have had to put in some sort of a manageable place to get where I am. But the death of George Floyd, the continued traumatic encounters that African-American, especially African-American males, have with policing authorities has an impact on me. It's not like David Woody hasn't experienced those same kinds of experiences in the community. And so to model the capacity to engage the thoughts and feelings that come with those traumatic experiences, and to be able to model how to manage those experiences and hold the focus in terms of the rest of one's life has been an extremely powerful experience. A lot of folks, and I'm talking about that a lot with my wife, with my colleagues, and also having to talk here on our campus about, are there ways for us to do better here in terms of meeting the needs of guests who have experienced incredible trauma as it relates to issues of racial injustice.
Oh, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing, particularly the vulnerability that comes with like dealing with this and dealing with your work experience, right? And also tending to the needs of folks who need care in your field. So in that same vein, it's a lot of work that we need to do in order to address not only homelessness, but racialized homelessness. From the Bridges perspective, what do you think needs to happen from a citywide perspective, whether it's from like citizens, what do we need to do? What does the city, the county, the state need to do? What do we need to do in order to, start some transformation in homelessness, particularly from the Bridges perspective?
So let me start at a micro level. Let's start right here at the house. Okay, I know that we have been partnering with your organization, with MDHA, in terms of using to drive training, right? We have begun to, here at the Bridge, think about how is it that we can educate our employees on issues of racism and its impact on homelessness. And ultimately, because again, here at the Bridge, we're really big on this whole housing thing, right? And so that has to be taken into account by our professional staff as we go about the function of a guest care and housing plan, identification of a home of their own. And so how it is that we deal with that personally and professionally, we have to be in the best place possible to help somebody else. And so we've just begun a training experience here on the campus with your assistance that is looking at everyone from our cleaning staff all the way up to our board of directors in terms of educating folks on what does this intersection of racism, feelings of difference, and fear about that, how does that influence one's capacity to engage a guest, and in terms of what we're supposed to be doing here on this campus, help that guest acquire housing, okay? And so we're working on that. A second piece is, and again, you have been extremely helpful with this, MDHA, in terms of educating our community, right? Homelessness. There are a lot of folks who want to make this homeless experience very easy. If you didn't do this, you wouldn't be homeless. Okay, and that's just not the case. It is such. Right now, I probably have 400 individuals on our campus. There are 400 unique stories as to how it is that folks become homeless. And the SPARC report identifies 5 or 6 things that conspire, come together for some individuals to create homelessness. And so how is it that we get that good, basic, data-driven information in front of folks, and more importantly, have a conversation about it, okay? I know as a researcher, when I first got into it, I said, I just need to digest all of this material and it's all good. No, good researchers analyze it. They think critically about what it is that someone would put in front of them. And there's a way to make this information palatable and then to have a conversation about what's happening, because many people have a preconceived notion, right, about what homelessness is. When folks come to the Bridge for a tour, I usually ask folks, because sometimes they just can't believe what we have here, that we're so blessed to have here. And I will ask people at the end, well, what did you think about it? And most folks are just, that they're blown away. And what they will typically say is, they won't say that, well, I thought it would be dark and dungy and dirty, but they do say, it sure wasn't anything like I thought it was gonna be. And so it's that same kind of dynamic, which is, how is it that we create comfortable, safe spaces to have conversations about such topics as racism that many folks are afraid of? It's a taboo subject. We've got to make it possible in this current environment for folks to at least have comfortable conversations about this issue. And that goes for even our city officials and our state officials. Here in Texas, it's not talked about. How do we make that happen? It's through engaging folks with that kind of leverage, that kind of power in our community, and educating them on the reality, what we see on this campus.
Thank you for that. That was really powerful. And I'm glad you mentioned the SPARC report. You know, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later with our friends from and David, but
yeah.
The SPARC report in 2018 mentioned that approximately 2/3 of people experiencing homelessness in the SPARC communities that they surveyed were Black, which is about 64.7% of folks. That's a huge number.
Amazing.
About amazing communities. Why do you think, particularly as a person who is working directly in this service space, why don't people understand that number, and why don't they understand like the policies that are connected to it, particularly for the Black community, African American community?
I would say this. You know, a lot of the research is there's so much myth out there about the experience, for example, of poverty. Okay, again, African Americans in the United States, what is it? 12, 11, 13% of the population,
12
right?
to 14%.
Right. But when folks think about individuals in poverty, right, they don't think about the larger percentage of folks who are not of color who make up that population for some reason, right? And so we hear only about bad stories, right? When I look at the news, it's typically a story about folks who have had some major issue, failing, problem, and it's a person of color. That our society leans in that way is an incredible dynamic that flows through everything. And so I know that in some of the research that I was doing, I was challenged heavily because I was very interested in the single African-American female experience and what allows them to be successful. When you read about that population, you only successful. We all know very successful single African-American females, but we don't hear about those folks, right? And so in my research, there's a gap in the literature there, okay? What makes them successful, right? And so that's what I was trying to fill. It's the same thing with homelessness, right? Why is it that folks of color seem to disproportionately end up coming to the bridge, literally? And so there are things going on in the larger community, right, which impact folks' capacity to acquire the services necessary for them not to get here, inability to access it, the communities that they live in, that there may not be the quality of models, or that folks aren't connecting with folks in a constructive and positive way. And so I am on how is it that we add more of that constructive, positive information to our environment to create this balance of options, right? I know as a social worker, one of the major things that I'm always trying to do is to make sure that folks are aware of their options, right? And that's especially important in the African-American community. When I'm teaching on a college campus and folks see someone like me, that's an option to an African-American individual. Most folks don't realize the significance of what you see and options.
No, it's really important, Dr. Woody. And I'm just really glad that you're here doing this work. You mentioned narratives, which is the first part of our work what we call the truth or the narrative change, which not only includes this very dark and terrible stories about racism, but includes these very positive stories about our community's struggles and resistance and also successes. What can the community do to support not only your work at the Bridge, but this new work that we're doing also of trying to help the community understand these policies that have enacted very systemically racism upon our communities that have caused things like homelessness. And what David Gruber likes to say is that we want to end homelessness altogether, right? We don't want to just put people in housing and be contributing to the status quo. We want to work to end homelessness, and I think we can do that. It's not a unaccomplishable thing. It's really just about willpower. So what do we have to change in the willpower of our community to support that?
When I was doing research for my dissertation, there was a scholar, Robert Hill, who described the strengths of Black families. You may have heard of that, right? Robert Hill, 5 strengths. And some of those characteristics still ring true. Flexibility in family roles, strong work ethic and orientation, right? The significance, the power of spirituality, just 3 of them. And we continue to need to get individuals in African-American communities to step up and tell those stories, right? And to create forums for that. I know that that's one of the things that your organization heavily is lifting up. Opportunities for the fact that we're doing this right now is an opportunity for folks to tell the story, to reimagine the narrative. How about that, right? The faith community has such an incredible impact, not only meeting individual spiritual needs, but a commitment to advocacy, right? Housing, healthcare. That's some of our church homes have hosted, been the host to COVID-19 testing stations, that they are out right now trying to help folks register to vote. All of these things in the community where folks know in communities that often it's our spiritual homes that are beacons for resources. How do we capture that? How do we organize that, right? To create some synergy around advocacy. How do we encourage? How do we empower, right? Our citizens who have skills, who have knowledge to give back or to attract folks to them who can marshal their efforts. Right? Right now, I know that in African-American communities, there have been huge concerns just about whether or not folks have access to now when children can't be in school, that we would have folks who would advocate for that need and have the skills and energy, enthusiasm, passion to go to organizations who can offer assistance, AT&T, Verizon, who has it, to offer internet services in communities where those technological needs just don't exist. So in the communities to have groups who would pull folks together, right? And help to prioritize in neighborhoods what exist and who can we connect to to try to bring those needs, make sure that those needs are taken care of in the community.
That's great, Dr. Woody. Again, thank you for your time this morning. As a last question, how can we find out more about the Bridges work? Please shout out all of your social media, your address, and tell us how folks can support the Bridge financially and otherwise.
Exactly. If folks would go to Bridge, BRIDGEHRC.org, you will see our awesome website. Devin Wellborn, I'm going to give her a plug here, our marketing and communications person, has been with us maybe 6 months, probably less than 6, has really made, I think, our website attractive, and I hope that folks would go to check us out. Again, as you can imagine, with Buster, big time. And so just making sure that our guests have access to personal protective equipment, hand sanitizer, wipes, the masks, the budget busting, but we've got to have it. So for folks to come alongside us in that way would be helpful. We, like many nonprofits in this space, are also just beginning to plan for how we will be inviting volunteers back onto the campus safely. Our guests are craving bingo, karaoke, all those awesome additional things that we would offer here on the campus. And so we're looking forward to getting those things up and running again very shortly. But folks can check out our website and look for under volunteers for exactly our timing on that as well. So I will say that I may have to duck out for a second, but I'm expecting things are working out that I will be able to rejoin you all as you wind this down this morning. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Dr. Woody, I want to thank you first of all for stepping up and being a pilot subject for this work around race and racism and homelessness. I want to thank your staff for their willingness to engage us. Some of them have been amazing and really helpful as we plan this out. Again, we are really just trying to wade our way through this work, and we really appreciate you being a partner with us and taking time out of your morning. We appreciate hope to see you later today.
We will. Yeah, pretty appreciate y'all asking me. And again, to you, Jerry, thank you so much for the support. The staff appreciates you and all of your staff, their support. And we're learning. We're getting better. So we appreciate that.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Woody. We'll see you again.
Okay.
So yes, thank you all for joining us on that talk. We really appreciate Dr. Woody. Now we want to introduce our partners from MDHA, David Gruber, who is Development and Communications Director for MDHA, and the new Vice President of Operations, Nissy New. Both of them are my friends and colleagues in this work and really appreciate them. So welcome, David and Nissy. Please introduce yourselves, tell a little bit more about what you do, and we'll get into our presentation. For this part of our conversation for Transformation Tuesdays and Hard Conversations, we'll be giving you all some really in-depth information about the work that we're doing together, particularly around data in race and racism and homelessness, and would love to kick that off. So thank you, David.
So I'm going first, apparently, huh? Okay.
Yes,
I'm David Gruber. As Jerry said, Development and Communications Director for Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. I like to say that Development and Communications Director means that I don't do any of the real work. My colleagues do all the real work, and I tell you about it, communications, and then I demand that you pay for it, development. So what is MDHA? MDHA is a backbone organization that leads the development of an effective homeless response system in partnership with 80+ public, private, and nonprofit institutions. We make the experience of homelessness in Dallas and Collin counties rare, brief, and non-recurring. So that's what MDHA is all about. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of an inside look here. I'm probably not supposed to do that. So a few minutes before the presentation, Nissy told me, hey, I added in this slide. I hope that's okay with you. So racism is the cause of homelessness. And that is very accurate. And I think that by the end of this presentation, you'll see what we mean, because I can imagine that looking at that, you're like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Whoa, racism, huh? Maybe homelessness and racism are related. Maybe there's some kind of connection, but racism is the cause of homelessness. What are you talking about? I think by the end of this presentation, when you look at the numbers, you will see that that is absolutely true. So let's take a look at the numbers and let's talk about how we got to where we are. Okay. So in 2016, what was at the time called the Center for Social Innovation, they've since rebranded as C4 Innovations, commonly referred to then and now as C4. They brought the facts that you see here to our attention, and those facts are, and they brought the facts about the national numbers to our attention. Then I did some research on the Dallas numbers, and I was shocked. So if you look at the population of the United States and the population of Dallas County, both are somewhere around 13% African American. Okay, so 13% African American in both Dallas and nationally. Now then, when you look at the population of the homeless, you see that about 40% of the homeless population are African American, and about 28% of the unsheltered homeless population are African American. So that's what they told us. Then I did some quick number crunching, and I found the shocking numbers that you see in red, that at the time, and it really hasn't substantially changed. It'll go up a few percentages, go down a few percentages, but essentially what we found in 2016 was that African Americans make up 67% of the Dallas homeless population. And whereas nationally, in comparison, in the unsheltered homeless population, it actually is a lower percentage. In Dallas, it is slightly higher. So 70% of the Dallas unsheltered homeless population are African Americans. When I initially told C4 about this, they said to me, "You must be wrong. That you must have gotten the numbers wrong. It can't be that high." And I said, "No." I double checked and I triple checked because I myself was kind of stunned, and those are the numbers. Now here are some more recent numbers just to give you a little bit of some perspective. So white people constitute 63.2% of the general population. They are slightly underrepresented in the group that are in deep poverty, and they are drastically underrepresented in the homeless population, where they are less than 30%. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the numbers that show up in poverty cannot sufficiently explain what's going on in homelessness. So nationally, about 26% of the population of persons living in poverty are African American. So that can't, so you might expect, okay, if poverty, if homelessness corresponds to poverty, then you would see 26% of the homeless population African American, but you see 40%. So that idea right off the bat, poverty cannot sufficiently explain it. Now C4 was having a discussion with a number of different communities. They were trying to put together a number of different communities to do a research and action program together. So let's take a look at the next slide. So meanwhile in Dallas, in the aftermath of the July 7th, 2016 shooting, what happened was, as tragedy strikes, people want to give money. They want to give money to someplace they can trust and make sure that it'll go to the right people. And so United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, often in those cases will just say, hey, here's a pot here. We're opening a little pot of money here. You put your money here and we'll put it towards the right cause. And so they did that, and United Way pretty much immediately cut some checks to families that were directly affected, the families of the police officers. And then they had a more lengthy process where they said, okay, well, now we've collected a certain amount of money. Let's put it into programs that can help heal the city, specifically in the area of race. And so fortuitously at that same time, right, we had C4 calling for program. They were very explicit about it being a research and action program, because you don't want to just act, but you don't want to only do research. You can't say to the guy living under the bridge, hey, hang tight, we'll research this for a few years and then we'll get back to you. That's not really a great strategy. So they wanted to do both at the same time. And they named this program SPARC, Supporting Partnerships for Anti-Racist Communities. And the idea was to close the racial gap that has led to disproportionate homelessness among African Americans. And so United Way gave us a grant of $32,700 that covered this cost of the entire program. And we partnered with C4 and with a number of other cities with the idea of establishing racial equity in homeless services. Let's go to the next slide now. And so here's what happened between the years 2016 and 2018, which was the first step here. So C4 kicked things off with a hard conversation. That's our series, which today we are sharing that with Transformation Tuesday. So we've had this series of conversations that we've been conducting since early April 2015 we started it. And so we had a conversation titled Racism and Homelessness, and they also delivered some trainings at the time. They then came back in early 2017, and they regularly met with us and with key community players, and they met with foundations. So we met, for instance, we went and met with the precursors who told us, hey, we're planning to get a grant from the Kellogg Foundation and bring some program here. And they probably didn't mention the letters TRHT, but it was, the thinking around that had started. We met with 40 different pastors. We met with lots of different organizations, and they conducted some really in-depth quantitative and qualitative research. And they actually, as part of that, they analyzed about 5 years worth of data, of records from our community-wide database, the Homeless Management Information System. And then in 2018, February 2018, they held a national conference over at the Gates Foundation and brought all the communities to Seattle for that. And then they issued a national report, but also some community-specific reports. And I remember sitting with Jerry at Ascension Coffee later, a few months after that, and Jerry was giddy with the amount of data, because it was really, really incredible just to see all the data that they had, specific recommendations. And we, that same month, we held a system-wide homeless response system leadership retreat. And the leadership retreat basically it totally endorsed, like said, no, we have to implement all of this, all of the recommendations in the SPARC report, no question. Now, after that, shortly after that, MDHA experienced a leadership change. C4 SPARC experienced a leadership change, and we had an interim leader, Diana Romanoli, who helped me kind of keep the SPARC ember burning here in Dallas. One of the things that we did is we got the board of MDHA, which currently also serves as the board of our continuum of care. And so they endorsed the strategic plan that came out of that retreat, including the SPARC recommendations. And a key partner that really helped us out with all of this was Faith Forward Dallas. Faith Forward Dallas is probably a group that many watching this are familiar with, a group of progressive clergy from different religions who work together on important issues here in Dallas. And they had invited me to join them because they wanted to get more into helping around homelessness. And we actually took Reverend Dr. Michael Waters, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, to that conference in February. And eventually we signed the shared homelessness initiative with Faith Forward Dallas with an emphasis on. Next slide. And this takes us to kind of the next period from late 2018 to early 2020. We were really kind of wrestling with what should we do next? How do we take this forward once the report was produced? There's specific recommendations, all the important leaders endorsed it. What do we then do? And we felt like we really needed some local guidance. And so naturally, the only person we could turn to was Jerry Hawkins from Dallas TRHT. So we did that. And Jerry helped us come up with Racial Equity and Homelessness 2.0. By the way, you can find all of this on our website on the page that I have very originally named Racial Equity. So you can find it all there. And United Way gave us some further funding to do that. Now, as you all know, in mid-2018, TRHT came out with the groundbreaking report, which shame on you if you've not read yet, a new community vision for Dallas. You really should read that. Even if you've read it before, read it again. And we formed a racial equity task force. And I knew that the best person to run that task force was a friend of mine from United Way at the time, Nissi New. And we had representation from United Way, from Faith Forward Dallas and the Bridge. And Nissi kind of kept this on the tracks, keeping me accountable and Jerry accountable and everybody accountable to the work. And as Jerry referred to and Dr. Woody referred to, one of the most important things that we've done in that period is basically piloting how do we train an entire institution, one of the major institutions in our homeless response system, really top to bottom in terms of racial equity. And it was really interesting to see how that training had just begun. And I remember sitting in Dr. Woody's office and him talking about how, wow, this had already hugely affected what was going on his campus. And so then concurrently, we began planning how to roll this out in other parts of the homeless response system. And then of course, COVID hit. So it threw us for a little bit of a loop. And I think now I'm going to let Nissi take it to the next step. So where we went from there.
Great. Thank you, David. Hello everyone. My name is Nissi New. I'm the VP of Operations here at the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. I'm really excited to be here and to talk more about race, racism, and homelessness. So I think, when we first started the conversation, David talked about racism as the cause of homelessness. And so now we really want to dive a little bit deeper into some recent data that we received. And it kind of articulates a little bit more of why we feel that way. So one thing to provide a little bit of baseline context is what the homeless response system is. So when an individual becomes homeless, they become part of our system. So we have about 80 partners at the table who are working hand in hand to ensure that that person's homelessness is rare, it's brief, and it's not recurring. So as part of that, this is kind of like an outline of what it looks like. It takes multiple steps to kind of get where the whole process is. And the really interesting thing about this is, after a person starts coming into the system, we actually have a lot of really great data about them, which is in our HMIS system, our Homeless Management Information System. So if you go to the next slide, so this is some recent research that came out of a new tool that HUD has released called the Stella tool. And it actually takes a whole bunch of our data and it produces back some racial equity numbers. And what you have here is data that was from October 2017 to September 2019. So it's a little bit of an outdated data, but it's still it's still pretty vibrant. And so I think there's definitely a reason to look at it and to analyze it. So what you see here is the days that an individual is experiencing homelessness and their race. So you have household type, so how they identified themselves, self-reported number of days homeless. So this is how many days I have been homeless, and kind of the number of households. So we wanted to provide a little bit of context to that number. So sometimes you might see very, very few days, but you're not going to see a lot of households as well. So I think that adds to that. So all households had about 387 days of self-reported homeless. So that's how long it took them to kind of walk through the system of becoming homeless and getting to the point of look at Blacks. You notice that individuals who are Black compared to all households, which is about 387. So why is that? What's happening there? And then you take a look and you can compare that to American Indian and Alaskan Native. You see that their days experiencing homelessness is 142. So what is going on within our system where we're having such varied results for different races who are experiencing homelessness? So that's one really interesting thing. And then you also take a look at individuals who are white and compare that to people who are Hispanic versus not Hispanic, right? So there's some really, really stark differences. And so what we're really saying when we see this is that we're within the system, people are not being treated, are not experiencing the same level of services, or are when they kind of go towards housing. So if you go to the next slide, what you have is returns to homelessness. So after we worked so hard to get them out and into permanent housing that's safe and secure, what we see then is that they're coming back. And so when you look at the data, all households, so they have 17% of our individuals are coming back into homelessness. And then you kind of look at different races and you realize, well, so individuals who are Black have about 19% rate of return compared to American Indians who have about 8% rate of return, or even whites who have about 13% return. So what is happening in that permanent housing destination that they actually are not staying? And what could that be? And how does that kind of help? How can we kind of think about the system as a whole and develop solutions that ensure that people stay in those permanent housing more and longer? So I'm going to hand it off to Jerry to talk a little bit more about our work.
Awesome. Thank you, Nissi and David. So the narrative, particularly around homelessness in Dallas, has been out here. The Dallas Morning News reported in 2018, does Dallas homeless population show that the city is racist, based on the work of MDHA and the SPARC report. And KERA also followed those up with a couple of headlines, including how Dallas history paved the way for a disproportionately Black homeless population, and also how homeless youth in Dallas County are largely female African American. And even the Dallas Examiner talked about how over half of the homeless population in Dallas is Black. So our city has been very knowledgeable from a media perspective about this work for a long time. Our goal is to educate our wider community on the seriousness of this issue. And I was really glad to partner with David to talk about the issue, to learn more about it from the SPARC report's perspective, and to help create kind of a framework for doing the work. And so that's what I want to talk about first. Our initial partners for racial equity and homelessness are United Way. We're really thankful and pleased that our partner United Way has provided funding for us to start the steering committee process that is led by MDHA and the SPARC data, Dallas TRHT, and our friend Almaz from Faith Forward Texas, Faith Forward Dallas. And we want to, eventually grow this next slide to include all of our potential local partners and even more folks on here. We're glad that we are now partnering with the Bridge to pilot this work, but I don't think people understand how wide and how expansive not only our homelessness sector is, but the folks who are also working in housing. For example, Dallas ISD also works with thousands of homeless youth. So that's something that we really have to, get our heads around how large and expansive not only issues of homelessness are, but particularly the intersection of race, racism, and homelessness. And so our framework for racial equity and homelessness 2.0, next slide, is based on what we call educate, collaborate, and initiate. And so we are in the early educate phase where we are going to learn this issue of racial equity and homelessness, which includes community forums like the one we're doing today, community discussions, presentations, and also symposiums, and hopefully a summit and a conference that we can put together. We are also in the midst of a pilot, in the steering committee process, which is great because we get to put our minds together and really think about how we can find some impact and also get some early data about how we can educate our community. We were so lucky to partner with the Bridge and their awesome leader, Dr. Woody, who was very gracious enough to let us inside his organization and sort of experiment with the work that we need to do. Our next phase, hopefully, is to collaborate. So once we have some initial data from the Bridge and some feedback from their awesome staff members, we will collaborate. We want to great partnership phase that we shared about. We also want to do some more group racial equity trainings, collaborate on some strategic workshops, and then create the shared vision and this plan proposal to, do what David Gruber says, end racism and homelessness for all, right? And then we do this initiate, right? We obviously going to need more funding because we want everybody in the homelessness sector to participate in this work. We also need to work on a new homelessness policy based on racial equity with a racial equity lens. And we also need programming that will also serve, that aim as well. And then we need to evaluate that work and to continue to partner with folks like C4 and other evaluative partners to make sure that we are being accountable to that work. So this is our grand plan. We hope to continue to work at the Bridge very soon now that some of the COVID restrictions are lessening. We're still in the pandemic, so we want to be careful, but we definitely want to continue that work. And we will be sharing more of this work as it goes on. So I would love now to just talk to David and Nissy about not only the work that we're doing, but the work we hope to happen in Dallas. Thank you again, David and Nissy, for sharing your time and your space and your brand, Hard Conversations. I want to start by, David, you've been in this, space for a while. David, can you share anything about this intersection of race and homelessness, right? How has it manifested in Dallas that you know about? And then how can Dallas, how does the Dallas community responded since you've been doing this work? And then do you have any history to share?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's such a huge question, right? I mean, your first question, talk about the intersection of race and homelessness. And like the question is, you know, how many hours do we have, you know, to talk about that? I think, you know, the, the numbers make it very, very clear, right? That the statement that bold statement that Nissi added into our presentation, you know, that racism is the cause of homelessness. I mean, it's inescapable. And really then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what's going on here? And there's a sentence that I'll never forget. I was introduced to it when we started this work by Jeff Olivet, who was at the time was the I think he was the CEO of C4, and he still is very deeply very deep in this work. And he said, you know, that often people will say, well, it's such a problem, such and such system is broken, we need to fix it, right? And he said, no, that's not what's going on here. It's not that the system isn't working. The system is working exactly as it was designed to work, right? So, and that's what's going on here. If we think about homelessness in general, the way I like to talk about homelessness, and you know, it's a whole conversation about why homelessness happens, and usually I go into a lengthy first conversation about why it doesn't happen. Of course, we don't have time for that right now. You can watch that all on our website, on our educational video and audio page. But the way to look at homelessness is that homelessness is actually probably won't happen to any of us. Because what you really have to imagine is imagine yourself a trapeze artist, and you're swinging on the trapeze, and you're a beginning trapeze artist. So you've got 3 nets under you, not 1. And the first net that catches each of us is our income, right? We have a certain, you know, a certain day of the month, or every 2 weeks, or whatever it is, and you've got a certain amount of income that that we receive, and that enables us to pay rent, pay mortgage, whatever it is. Now, if that went away, most of us have some type of financial assets we can rely on. And so again, we won't become homeless just because, you know, we took 2 weeks off of work. And then if that net disappears, most of us will not become homeless because we have a network of social connections. We have family, we have friends, perhaps we have a social club we belong to. And so actually, in general in the population, homelessness is quite rare because you have to fall through that final net, right? That network of social connections has to be frayed to start with, or it disintegrated at some point for whatever reason, and that is how you become homeless ultimately. Now, using that metaphor, imagine you actually have a pretty good network of social connections, but everybody in your network essentially has 0 assets. Everybody in your network has 0 assets. Then even if you have these social connections to rely on, it's not going to be that helpful. And that's what's going on here. Because as, you know, no doubt, you know, Jerry, you could, if I woke you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you could tell us all the numbers, right? But simple numbers that we find, for instance, about, you know, for every $1 that a white family has in assets, the black family has like 8 cents. You know, things like that. So if you have an entire community who didn't end up there by accident, that's not an accident that they have 8 cents for that $1. They didn't end up there. That is by design. There are systems that are set up in our country for the last 400 some years that took us to that place. And there are systems in the city of Dallas specifically that took us to that place. And so that's really, when Jeff says it's not that the system isn't working, it's working exactly as it was designed to work, that's what we're talking about. It's not just a slogan, that's what we're talking about. And so that's why you see that we end up with such high percentages of the homeless population being specifically African.
Thank you, David. We really appreciate that answer, because I think it gives us a metaphor, particularly the trapeze nets, right? A really good metaphor for how it happens. And I think that's a really good way for folks to think about that as they do programming. I want to ask Nissy a question before we get to this Facebook question, because we have a great Facebook question and I want to address some of it too. But Nissy, you know, during this time, as I asked Dr. Woody, obviously we have a pandemic that has no end in sight right now, right? You know, election time where folks are dealing with voter suppression and these long lines. I see long lines outside, and this reckoning with racism that's still happening. You know, how is it affecting the way that you all are carrying out your work, and what are you all planning to do in this time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, you know, really, I feel like a lot of us are feeling very tired. We're just exhausted with trying to cope with all of the things that are going on. You know, you have the pandemic, and then you have racial injustice, and you have the election. It just feels very uncontrollable what the world does. And so I think because of all of that, we just want change. We just want some action, and we want someone to help us kind of lead us to that world where we can see where it needs to be. You know, I think we all have that vision. So how do we get there, and how do we get to that change, which is what, Jerry, you're helping us get there too, right? And I think that's why we're so intent on using the racial equity work that we're doing within the Dallas and Collin County homeless response system to bring about that change. The system that we are in has a lot of power. We can really change that, and we can make it more equitable. We can look at the data and analyze how case managers are treating individuals who are Black versus white versus American Indian. And we can think about what training can we do, what actions do we need to do. We can look at the leadership within all the homeless response agencies and think about what % are Black, like Dr. Liddy, or what % are white. So how do we mirror the leadership within the organizations to be similar to the population? We can also look at our board and think about how is our board similar to people that are experiencing homelessness. So how do we bring the diversity and inclusion into this work? How do we change the systems? And I think also for us, it's not just about looking within the homeless response system. It's also thinking about, what about the criminal justice system? What about the healthcare system? How do we start intersecting all of those big, huge systems that also touch the homeless response system, and start bringing about some coordinated change? So how can we work with Parkland? How can we work with criminal justice system to say, hey, these are policies that are really actually hurting our folks, and it's primarily hurting folks that are individuals of color, and how can we change some of those things to kind of bring about what we need to see in our community? I think people are ready for change. We want to see it. We want it to happen. Let's figure out how to get there.
That's really good. I think, as we know, it's going to take a massive push from all of us. You know, as David and I talk about often, these institutions are very stubborn. So, you know, we hope that this work is going to, you know, bring more people to the carpet, so to speak, so we can start to do a bigger push. Let's address this question from Facebook. It says, specifically for youth experiencing homelessness, are there plans to collectively and in collaboration address the systemic racism present in the known youth system map? The system map, which only effectively shows the foster care to prison pipeline and how it looks in Dallas, despite the varying federal definitions of children and youth. It continues, it says, considering the lack of data specific to youth experiencing homelessness and data, yet Dallas is nationally ranked as having the 3rd highest rate of child poverty, that children living in poverty are 3.5 times more likely to experience repeated trauma, and that trauma is linked to risky behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potential, and early death. That's a huge things. As for Dallas TRHT, we actually partnered with the Dallas Public Library in 2018 for a Kellogg-funded partnership pilot program. It was called TRHT Great Stories Book Club, and it was through the American Library Association. And so Dallas TRHT, the Dallas Public Library, and Promise House, which serves unhoused teens and works with them, particularly around trauma issues. We held this Great Stories Book Club in which some of the teens in Promise House were able to get books that dealt with issues of racial injustice and social justice. They got those books free of charge and were able to write about their experiences and the characters in the books, but also receive from Dallas TRHT and other Kellogg funded racial healing folks, this racial healing circle. And it was a really great experience to partner with Promise House and Dallas Public Library on this experience, because what it revealed to me was that young people don't have outlets to talk about race and the trauma that's happened in their lives, and that they're very able and willing to share those experiences and also provide spaces of healing if those spaces are made for them. So it really opened my eyes that they are going through similar experiences as adults. They talked about child trafficking, they talked about prostitution, they talked about being part of the criminal justice system. And I really knew that we had to, do a larger project, which we hopefully are going to do in 2021. So that's from the Dallas TRHT's perspective. I would love for you all to add anything about your support or interest in that work, particularly around youth and homelessness.
So I'm going to ask. So first of all, I would like to say that we do have a wonderful group of people that are working on this youth homelessness, and it's a huge issue. And a lot of it is caused by specific, approaches and social problems that are slightly different from the ones that adults are experiencing. It also boils down to, folks losing their social network of support. But sometimes the cause can be different. So for instance, we do know that 40%, nationally, 40% of youth homelessness is LGBT, because that is one way you can become homeless, is you come out to your family and your family says, well, in that case, it's been nice knowing you. So the proximate cause is losing that social network that you had, but obviously the causes can be slightly different than from an adult. We do have a wonderful group of folks that are working on that, and they need more support. They need more people to join them. It's called the MDHA Youth Committee. And what I'd actually like Nissi to address, and this is a whole other conversation, but I think it might be useful to reference it, is we're going through a system transformation where we're going to be working a lot harder on very, very specific problems, such as youth homelessness. So Nissi, would you mind kind of giving a quick reference to that? Because I think that'll also answer the question.
Yes, definitely. So MDHA and our partners within the COC have been embarking on a system transformation where we're really looking at how we can move people into housing sooner. And that means changing and tweaking the systems and kind of removing a lot of barriers that might have intentionally put people to intentionally or unintentionally to help kind of look at the system. So we, as part of that, system transformation work, we also have a lot of work groups that are looking at every specific issue. So to David's point, he talks about an MDHA youth committee. So that youth committee is made up of wonderful individuals who are passionate and very knowledgeable about the youth homelessness area, and are really also going to be tackling racial equity within that. So we, as an MDHA abroad, we have an MDHA racial equity homelessness committee, but within all of these steering little work groups that we have, each of these work groups will also talk about racial equity, and we'll have plans, and and that will be a forefront for them as well. So I think it's definitely something we understand, we recognize, and that we are working to implement into the system so that it is never afterthought, it is present and always upfront in the work that we're doing.
I think just to add to that, to underline what Nissi is saying, is one of the things that the SPARC report talked about and that we always keep in mind is that racial equity is not another program, quote unquote, right? It's not just another program. If you recognize the fact that in Dallas, we have such a high percentage of the homeless population as African American and other persons of color, to the extent that following our introduction of this entire issue to Dallas, as you showed, the Dallas Morning News couldn't help but headlining their article with referencing like, is Dallas racist, essentially, right, as a city, which is a painful question. It's a painful question, and if you're honest about the answer, it's even more painful. So you can't have racial equity just be kind of like, the flavor of the month program, or something from time to time that we're just like, well, you know what, this month we'll look at racial equity. No, it has to be ingrained into every single thing that you do, because 65 to 70% of your population are African American. So it just has to be part and parcel of everything that you do.
No, that's awesome. Thank you all for that. I also want to give a shout out to House of Rebirth and Nisi. Nisi is created a space for Black trans women and other non-binary people, particularly the unhoused, creates a space for them to have a place to go. Dallas is also the epicenter of violence on Black trans women, who are the highest percentage of folks who have the potential to be unhoused, according to a lot of data. So I want to give a shout out to Nisi and House of Rebirth, and really support them because they need a lot of your support. We have a couple of more questions. We've described the problem in death. We obviously know that there's a huge issue when it comes to racism, and homelessness. Let's describe some of what is the transformation that needs to take place. David Gruber, I've always heard you say, I'm not trying to just, put some people in houses, and, I'm trying to end homelessness, right? We're trying to end homelessness. How can we do that, right? It's like, for me, I see that's a huge issue. Like, if we end homelessness, we got to end racism, we got to end a whole bunch of other things, right? So how can we begin that process here in Dallas? How can we end homelessness in Dallas, particularly the repair and transformation needed to do that?
So here's the really interesting thing about homelessness. I sometimes say the beauty of homelessness, but that sounds wrong. The beauty of ending homelessness is that really we don't have to solve all those other societal problems in order to end homelessness, right? Sometimes that's what people will say, is they'll say, oh my God, homelessness is such a huge issue. There's no way we can end homelessness because, listen, it's related to all these other things. And the last thing I would want for people to come away from this presentation would be to kind of walk out of here really morose and saying, oh my God, racism is the cause of homelessness. Come on, it's not like we're going to end racism tomorrow, so there's no chance at ending homelessness. And actually, to deal with homelessness is not really that complicated. It's hard, but it's not complicated. So here's how you end someone's homelessness. Okay, I'm going to walk you through all of the steps of ending someone's homelessness. Okay, you find them a housing unit, you place them in the housing unit, and now they're not homeless anymore. That's it. Now, of course, people will say, well, that's not it, David. That can't be it. Of course, there needs to be a steady source of payment. So maybe they get a job. Maybe they, they get a voucher. Oh, but David, they have all these other problems that they need to deal with. Sure, I'm not saying that for every person out there, all they need is housing, and then we can just walk away and say, hey, have a nice day. We'll never see you again. Obviously, some people need a certain level of services. Some people need a lot of services. Those are actually the minority of people. But that's, the beauty of ending homelessness is that really at its core, it's kind of simple, right? Is this person doesn't have a home, they don't have an address, let's make sure they now have a home and now have an address. And so we don't need to end poverty to do that. We don't need to end racism to do that. We don't need to end mental illness or end drug addiction. Those are favorites of people, right? There are plenty of rich people that are addicted to drugs or alcohol, that don't have a huge amount of assets, that may have some type of mental illness, that may have some type of physical disability, whatever it is, and the vast majority, 99% of those people remain housed. It is true, however, that we need within our system to address these, again. So if we have a population that in general has 13% of African Americans, there is no reason that that the homeless population should not reflect that same percentage. And so we need to work within the homeless response system to make sure that we fix that. And that goes to training people. That goes to making sure that the right people are in place doing the right jobs. That means making sure that leadership of institutions, both lay and professional, reflect the population that we're serving. So there's a lot that we need to do there. And again, you can go and read the SPARC report, and if you don't like numbers and math like me, you can kind of flip to the end and read the recommendations. And they're very specific recommendations about how we get there. But it's very, very doable. Ending homelessness is doable, and bringing about racial equity in homelessness is very doable.
Thank you, David. That's, really clear cut, but it's also something that we have to help folks get the willpower to do. Nissy, what can we do what can the community do? Not to just only support MDHA's work, but to support and promote racial equity and racial justice in organizations that are serving the unhoused in Dallas?
I think, first and foremost is kind of understanding that it is a problem, like looking at the data, looking at the SPARC report, and kind of really understanding what might have been the history, the policies, and the practices that have led us to where we are today. So that when you're driving and you see somebody on the side of the street, you're not thinking about that person as kind of their own world. You're thinking about how could that person come to where they are today? What were the policies? What are the assumptions that I have been trained on? What are my implicit biases that have kind of created this individual's life to where they are today? So looking at how and really recognizing the full context of the issue and not just that person in their solo environment. And I think to also just continuously keep us engaged in your lives, so understanding how we're working on this issue, we're constantly thinking about the issue, so keeping us in your mind. And then I kind of approach that question also as in a different context as a South Asian of dissent. And so I think in every culture, we all have to take this issue of racism in a very, very different context. So as a person who's South Asian, a lot of people that I know are like, well, this is about whites versus blacks, and I don't have a part in this context, and I don't have a part in this conversation. And that's just really not true. Like, we are all part of this conversation. And we are all living in America. This is also our land. So how do we come to the context, and how do we bring ourselves to talk about the racism that we also experience, not maybe the structural racism, but the individual racism that we might face, and also understanding the full context of history around the world of how Britain took over America, how we might have, how the Indians might have kind of moved forward from taking over from Britain, but a lot of the policies, the structural issues, a lot of the, whiteness preferred, the colorism issues, those are still very common in our culture today. So I think there's also a place for people like me to step in and really understand the history of America, the real history of America, and really think about how we have a place to make change. And then the other side of it is also how organizations within the CEOC and within the nonprofit sector really think about our role. So how do we do our hiring? How do we pay people of different races and different sexes? Is it equitable? How are we thinking about microaggressions? Yeah, we might have a really good racial equity statement, but so what? What does that really mean? How are we really tracking some really important figures for us? How do we step up and make a difference? And how do we make diversity and inclusion a real something that's actually really tangible for our community? So that was a little bit all over the place, but I think that's really what I think about when we talk about change in the community.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was great examples, and particularly bringing a personal story about your racial identity and your nationality into the conversation is really important. So it's my last question. How can we find out more about MDHA? Where can we find your work? How can folks support your work? And maybe give us a few words on what we need to be doing next.
So you can find us at mdhadallas.org. So Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, we commonly refer to ourselves as MDHA. So it's just mdhadallas.org. And obviously, like every nonprofit, and I referred to this before as myself, we always need financial support. We always welcome that. There's a big shiny donate button on the website. But beyond that, I would say that the really important things, and we do have on our website a tab that says Help MDHA End Homelessness, and it gives you a few different prescriptions. What I like to emphasize always the most is that we do what works. And when I say we, I refer not to just MDHA, but our entire system, which we sometimes refer to as the continuum of care, or COC, but those are jargon words. Essentially, it's the entire system of all these 80+ organizations that are working together, towards a set of common goals that all boil down to ending homelessness in Dallas. And so what we do is we do what works. That's the beauty of ending homelessness is this is not one of those problems that we need to research for another 20 years to figure out a solution. That research has been done. The consensus of researchers, it's in. The jury's in. We know how to end homelessness. Again, it's housing plus whatever type of services are needed, and that ends a person's homelessness. And so we do what works, not what will work or what we wish will work. And so what we urge you to do is support our homeless response system, support folks within our homeless response system that are doing what really works. And again, that goes to racial equity also, because again, with 70%, that means everything goes back to racial equity. What would you add, Nissi?
Thank you, David. What else is there to say? So I think, I definitely just want to reiterate that this is an issue for everyone. Racial equity and homelessness is an issue for everyone. We're all part of the solution, and we have something at stake here. So we encourage you to come along with us on this journey and think about your own self, your family, think about the structural systems, and we want you on our side to end homelessness. So come join us.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David and Nissy. I want to give a special thanks to MDHA for your continued work in this area. I want to thank you particular Nissy for leading our steering committee through 3 different organizations, and still your fervent commitment to this work has really been really great for us, because we needed that leader. So thank you so much, Nissy. Thank you, Gruber, for your advocacy. Follow Gruber on Twitter. He's a great follow for sure. He even shows wedding pictures, so that's really great. Thank you, Stephanie, too. And much love to my other partner, Erica. We hope you are well soon. Thank you again, Dr. Woody, for your leadership as well. This is another Transformation Tuesdays and Hard Conversations. Follow Dallas TRHT at dallastrht.org. We appreciate you for being here with us, and thank you for another Transformation Tuesdays. Talk to you all soon.